The chair now lays out Senate Bill 921. 921. You may have heard of ranked choice voting. The concept has been around for a while, but it's starting to pick up steam in a couple of parts of the country. And so this is what this bill's about. Let me explain a little bit about how it works, how we've seen it work in other states, and why we believe it would be really bad anywhere in Texas. The ranked choice voting is a very confusing election system. It's being pushed mostly in large cities, but also some states. And it fundamentally changes the election process. It disenfranchises voters, and it allows marginal candidates not supported by a majority of voters to be elected. So to be clear, candidates who do not receive the support of the majority of voters can be elected under this system. As of December of last year, 64 American jurisdictions have ranked choice voting in place. That covers about 13 million voters. 2 states, 2 counties, and 60 cities as of December of last year. Now, back in 2001, our Secretary of State was Henry Cuellar, who's now a member of Congress. And when he was Secretary of State, he wrote an election law opinion that ranked choice voting is illegal in Texas. We believe he was correct, but his opinion, of course, is not binding. A Secretary of State's opinion on election law is helpful, but it's not binding authority, and it doesn't keep cities or counties or other Texas jurisdictions from trying to move forward with this. So here's how it works. With ranked choice voting, when you go in to vote, the voter is asked to rank every candidate in a race, from the number 1 choice to their last choice. So in a race with 5 candidates, a voter is asked to rank the candidates from 1 through 5, with the candidate ranked as number 1 being our first choice, etc., all the way through number 5. And so after that takes place, when it's time to count the votes, if no candidate wins a majority in the tabulation of the ballots, then the candidate with the fewest number of votes is eliminated, and the voters who selected that candidate as their number 1 choice have their votes changed to their second choice, and another round of tabulation takes place. If no candidate wins in that second round of counting, the lowest scoring candidate is again eliminated, and the voters who selected that candidate as their top choice, or their second choice, if they already had their first one knocked off, then they have their next choice. The candidate is their number 1, and another count is done, and this is done round by round. So this candidate elimination and redistribution of ballots does a couple of things. It continues until one of the remaining candidates gets a majority. But that candidate may have been the second, third, fourth, or even last choice of the majority of the voters, meaning a candidate could win who is not the first choice of a majority of voters. It's confusing, it's an opaque process, and it's prone to errors. In Alameda County, California, officials found 2 months after a school board election, just last year, in 2022, a school board election took place, and 2 months after the race, they realized they had incorrectly counted the votes using ranked choice voting, and they had certified the wrong candidate as the winner. No election official even noticed because it's such a complex, complicated process. It was not until an outside advocacy group that went back and looked at the numbers realized the problem, and the election officials admitted it was an error. Back in 2021, in the New York mayor's race, it took 8 rounds of vote counting of the 10 candidates over 2 weeks before a final winner was announced. By the eighth round, the ballots of more than 140,000 had been thrown out because they did not completely rank all candidate choices. Now let's talk about that for just a moment. Let's say you're a voter and you're being asked to vote in this ranked choice election, and there are 5 candidates. You're asked to rank 1 through 5, but you're thinking, I don't want to dilute my vote. I'm just going to vote for my first choice, and I'm not going to vote for the rest. If you do that, once your first choice candidate gets knocked off, your vote does not count in subsequent rounds. That happened to 140,000 voters in the New York mayor's race in 2021. In fact, we've learned that in states and cities that have tried this, about 1/3 of all voters do not choose more than just the one candidate. So their votes get thrown out in those cases in subsequent rounds. I think you get how this works and the problems that come along with it. Exhausted ballots, that's what they call it, when those ranked choice elections when your votes don't count all the way down. Many of these ballots are thrown out due to voter error in following the instructions. And then voters that follow the instructions to the letter can be thrown away because their candidates are their votes are for the candidate that didn't make it through to that round. It's confusing, and as candidates come off through multiple rounds, voters go all the way down only if they rank them all that they were supposed to, and their candidate is still in the running. It's a very confusing process, and voters don't understand it. Voters are confused by it, and we understand that long and confusing ballots have a way of discouraging people from participating in the process. And so, like with so many items, this is mostly taking root at the city level, and we have to stop it before, again, some of our cities in Texas try to do this and confuse and disenfranchise voters using this really complicated and error-prone system. So that's ranked choice voting. You probably all knew that. I had to do a little study to get a handle on it, but it's taking root in some parts of the country, and we do not need it in Texas, or that's what the bill asserts. And I will yield for your questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Birdwell.
I'm sorry I'm the spring butt today asking all the questions, so let me, the intent of the bill is solid, but more of an administrative question in that the chapter that this is going into is subchapter B, which is the runoff chapter. Based upon where it's written, my sense is that it would preclude a ranked choice voting in the runoff, but we are, in a state of Texas, runoffs are already just the top two. Does this need to go in the chapter that deals with the primary election as opposed to the runoff election?
That's a great question. We looked at that, and it's in chapter 2, which is vote required for election to office, and then that subchapter, which deals with runoffs, because that's when these processes would kick in. But they tell us, since it is in the subchapter, it's in the chapter dealing with election for office, we're okay. We can tweak that if we need to, but we had Ledge Council and lawyers look at it, and they say, since it's in the right chapter, the subchapter is not relevant.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Members, any other questions? We'll open invited testimony and call Chase Martin. The chair calls Chase Martin, Senate Bill 921. Welcome. Get situated there and introduce yourself and give us your testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Hughes and honorable members of the committee. My name is Chase Martin, and I'm a visiting fellow at the Opportunity Solutions Project. OSP is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We work in 40 states across the country with one clear goal: to help more people achieve the American dream. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today in support of this legislation. SB 921 will protect Texas voters from ranked choice voting, a disastrous and alternative voting system that discounts votes, diminishes confidence, and threatens fast and accurate ballot counting. The bill will provide important clarity to the current general and administrative prohibition on preferential voting systems in Texas. Lawmakers across the country have recognized the problems with ranked choice voting, and in 2022, Florida and Tennessee banned it statewide and preempted local jurisdictions from adopting it. Special interest groups have successfully pushed ranked choice voting at the statewide level in Maine and Alaska through ballot initiatives. Some cities across the country have implemented it, including New York City, San Francisco, Burlington, Vermont, Portland, Oregon, and Cambridge, Massachusetts. Under ranked choice voting, voters are forced to rank all the candidates in order of their preference, even those they would never support. I think the chairman did a great job of summarizing it earlier. As he said, if no candidate wins a majority, then the candidate with the least number of votes is eliminated. The second preference choices of the voters whose candidate was eliminated are then used to retally the votes. The process is repeated until a candidate receives more than 50% of the votes that have not been exhausted. So let's review the problematic track record. Under ranked choice voting, not every ballot that is cast will count towards the election result. In Maine's 2018 2nd Congressional District election, over 8,000 ballots were tossed out and didn't count towards the election result. Bruce Poliquin received 46.3% of the vote ahead of Jared Golden's 45.6%. But since Poliquin didn't receive 50% of the vote, there was a second round of tabulation. The Secretary of State threw out the 8,000 exhausted ballots. Golden was declared the winner with 50.6% of the remaining ballots, but only 49.2% of the total ballots cast. Ranked choice voting created a fake majority. Golden never actually obtained a majority of votes that were cast in the election. In 2022, special election to fill the seat of the late Alaskan Congressman Don Young, nearly 15,000 votes were thrown out before the Democrat Mary Pilato was declared the winner. In fact, 60% of voters chose Republican in the first round, but by the last tally, Patola came out ahead by just 5,200 votes. The exhausted ballots were simply tossed out because they only voted for the other Republican candidate instead of ranking all of the candidates. Now I'll skip ahead because you summarized some of the great talking points of the numbers, but ranked choice voting also threatens fast and accurate ballot counting. New York City's 2021 Democratic mayoral primary took 15 days to announce a winner. The New York City Board of Elections accidentally included 135,000 test ballots in its publicly posted tally before fixing the error. In Maine in 2022, a technical snafu led to 2 memory sticks, which had recorded more than 16,000 ballots being corrupted. It took 7 days to figure out the deal there. I'll close with ranked choice voting undermines faith in democracy and voter confidence in election results. SB 921 will provide important clarity in Texas law and protect voters from this situation. I urge you to consider supporting this important legislation. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Senator, is there any questions for the witness? Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
We'll now open public testimony on Senate Bill 921. And the chair calls Robert Cohen, Andrew Eller, Liz Case Pickens, Susana Carranza. So Robert Cohen, Andrew Eller, Liz Case Pickens, Susana Carranza, and Fran Rose. First, I hadn't called for Miss Rose the first time. There she is, Fran Rose. Come on down, take a seat. Again, we're looking for Robert Cohen, Andrew Eller, Liz Case Pickens, Susana Carranza, and Fran Rhodes. We normally go from, well, my left to right, right to left. So Ms. Rhodes, if you're ready, we'll get situated there and introduce yourself, give us your testimony. Welcome.
Yes, my name is Fran Rhodes. I am president of True Texas Project. I am representing myself and True Texas Project today in support of SB 921. True Texas Project is a statewide grassroots political organization where we try to educate and motivate citizens to engage in government. We currently have 18 groups all over the state. So election integrity is one of the top issues among grassroots voters in Texas. We believe that allowing preferential voting systems would create voter exhaustion, diminish voter confidence, and threaten prompt election results. I personally am totally confused by this whole thing for all of the reasons that you laid out, Senator Hughes. I just can't imagine how it works and what a burden it will put on our election poll workers. I have experience working the ballot board in Tarrant County for about 4 or 5 years in a row, and that is a huge Herculean job as it is. If things have to be counted multiple times, I just can't even imagine, and I don't want to do it, so don't call on me. Also, I think that voters frequently go into the ballot box not really having a clue who they're going to vote for. Or maybe they've been told, okay, this senator and that House rep, but they don't know anything else. And ballots are huge in some counties, multiple pages. And people get worn out before they get to the bottom. And now we're going to ask them to say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 10, or however many candidates are there. I think you're going to see a lot of voter exhaustion as a result of that. Even the well-informed voter doesn't always know every candidate on the ballot. And so maybe they use party designations as a way to decide. But now we're asking them to know every single candidate from every party so that we can say 1, 2, 3, et cetera. I think it's too much. Ballot exhaustion occurs when voters overvote, undervote, or rank candidates that are no longer in contention. I don't understand how that works, but I read that that happens. In some elections, there are several pages of ballots, and voters don't even finish. They just get to the end. Anyway, I think this method of voting threatens so many things on so many levels, and we strongly support SB 921 to prohibit it, and thank you, Senator Hughes, for filing it, and we urge you all to support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Welcome, introduce yourself and give us your testimony.
Good morning. My name is Robert Cohen. I have a prepared statement I'd like to read from. To Senator Hughes, Committee Chair, and members of the State Affairs Committee, I wish to register my opposition to SB 921, which bans the use of preferential voting to determine majority vote in the state of Texas. Preferential voting, also known as ranked choice voting or instant runoff voting, is a highly effective means of determining a majority vote, and it should not be prohibited. I've noticed that there hasn't been any discussion about how this will affect military or overseas voters. There are approximately 86,000 military and overseas registered voters in Texas. 6 southern states use ranked choice voting ballots for deployed active military and other overseas voters, including Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina. These preferential ballots enable these people to have their votes counted during runoff elections. Without a preferential voting ballot, the delay in delivering standard runoff ballots and returning them before the election deadline is unlikely. These people have a right to participate and have their votes counted in runoff elections. Please do not silence them by banning preferential voting. Allowing preferential voting in special elections would save voter time and taxpayer money by eliminating high-cost, low-turnout runoff elections. Constituents would have representation sooner as well, because election results would be known faster than conducting a runoff election. I am a United States Marine Corps veteran who served in Afghanistan, and I explicitly remember being unable to vote in my local runoff elections due to exactly this issue. A vote against preferential voting is a vote against military members such as myself having a voice in the very system that we fight to protect. A ban on preferential voting is a bad idea. Please oppose SB 921. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Welcome, introduce yourself, give us your testimony.
Hi, my name is Andrew Eller, and I'm the State Republican Executive Committee Man for Senate District 24. I'm here on behalf of the SREC, the Republican Party of Texas, and myself, and we are for the bill. Ranked choice voting, normally abbreviated RCV, I typically call it really confusing to voters because it is inherently confusing, corrupt, opaque, and sometimes viewed as very unconstitutional. RCV violates the one voter, one candidate, one vote principle that we all know and love. RCV is a form of voter suppression as it creates confusion and disenfranchisement for both voters and election officials. Ballot exhaustion is created when a voter overvotes, undervotes, or only ranks candidates that are no longer in contention, and then the ballot no longer counts. In the end, up to 30% of the ballots in RCV elections are seen to have this problem. That's true disenfranchisement of voters. RCV disenfranchises voters who do not understand how the non-intuitive system works. This can lead to vulnerable voters being disenfranchised as studies on recent RCV elections have shown. And I'll bring up, Senator Hughes laid it out pretty well, what's happened, in some of the other municipalities like New York City. A lot of times we'll hear it needs to be education. Well, New York City spent over $15 million educating their voters, and they still had problems. You still heard that issues. Is another point, ranked choice, ranking candidates rather than voting for only one always results in legitimate ballots being discarded through the RCV multiple counting cycles. During each round of ballot counting, some voters' choices will fall by the wayside and be discarded, silencing their voices. These ballots become trash can, eliminated, or cast aside ballots. And you heard of the many different examples, such as the Oakland, California mayoral race, the New York City mayoral race, the Alameda County school board races, all of those issues. And I'd also like to point out that both the city of Memphis NAACP opposed ranked choice voting, and New York's NAACP also opposed ranked choice voting because it is voter suppression. And just one other thought, there are currently 4 bills on preferential voting before this legislature this session, and those are very bad bills, so we actually need this bill to be pushed through. And I appreciate your comments, letting me comment.
Thank you for your testimony. Dr. Carranza, welcome. Introduce yourself. Give us your testimony.
Hi, I'm Dr. Susana Carranza. I'm here representing myself, and I oppose Senate Bill 921. I'm an election judge. I participate in organizations that kind of do little mock elections to explain, how things like that work. Ranked choice voting is actually easier to understand. The systems count themselves. There's no we're not in a place that you have to have a person going there and putting ballots in separate piles. Ranked choice voting is much more taxpayer cost efficient because you don't have to have a second runoff election that usually has really low turnout, and that disenfranchises voters much more than having to choose multiple candidates. In ranked choice of voting elections, you don't have to choose all candidates. You can just rank however many you're familiar with ranking. That would not disenfranchise anybody. If candidates in the ballot and you want to choose them, you can choose them. It promotes consensus candidates because a candidate has to be somebody's second and third choice, so you're much less likely to get extreme views from either side. It promotes higher participation because the election itself happens at once. And also, usually most promoters of ranked choice voting promote for nonpartisan elections where you will have multiple candidates and then a runoff will be not representative of the whole population. So there are many, many reasons to like ranked choice voting. It's not that complicated. I've actually run ranked choice voting elections for local organizations, and it's a matter of you use it once, you learn, and everybody that had never used before, they actually came back to me and saying I like it. I wish every place was like that because the runoff elections are always problematic. I urge you to oppose this bill. Thank you. If you have any questions, let me know.
Thank you for your testimony. Senators, any questions for any of the witnesses? Thank you each for your testimony. Thank you for being here. The chair now calls Joanne Richards, Trudy Meyer, Jacob Spivak, Ken Moore. Again, the chair calls at this time Joanne Richards, Trudy Meyer, Jacob Spivak, Ken Moore, and Eldon Pearson. Eldon Pearson, please come take a seat. So we're looking for Joanne Richards, Trudy Meyer, Jacob Spivak, Ken Moore, Eldon Pearson. All right, we'll begin here. When you get ready, introduce yourself and give us your testimony. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. My name is Eldon Pearson, and I am representing myself. I would like to start my testimony with a quote. Political parties, They are likely in the course of time and things to become potential engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. Those were the famous words of George Washington during his farewell address in September of 1796. And as we discussed the option of no longer having the discussion on ranked choice voting, I felt these words were important to have echoed throughout this chamber. George Washington, our only independent president, warned the American people in this speech about the detrimental impact that opposing political parties could have on our democracy. Eliminating ranked choice voting entirely will make it nearly impossible for independent candidates to become elected and pours more gasoline on the unprecedented and growing issue of hyperpartisanship. A 2020 study taken down the road at the University of Texas found that 30% of Texan voters do not strongly identify with a political party. And a Gallup poll from last month found that 44% of national voters self-identify as independent. With these margins growing, we want representatives who are issue-oriented and committed to serving their constituents' interests, not their parties. For all of you sitting at this table, ranked choice voting would liberate you to better serve your constituents, your state, and even yourself by reintroducing your ability to truly choose how you are voting on issues without the pressure of partisan influence in choosing for you. I urge you not to pass this bill from committee and be guided by the words of our first and only independent president. Will you subvert popular sovereignty, or will you join us, the people, and be a champion for the founding principles of our democracy? Thank you.
Mr. President, thanks for your testimony. I think Senator Betancourt has a question for you.
Mr. President, when you look at the historical record, did you look at how the third-party movements have started, like the Populist Party, even back in the 1800s, the Whig parties, et cetera, how they fractured in that particular period of time? Because I think if you go back and you look at some of the third-party movements, you'll see that the absorption of ideas, okay, is what occurred as opposed to really anything else. So I would go back and just take a look at the study of the third-party movements, everything all the way up to the United We Stand movement through with Ross Perot, and you'll see those issues absorbed by the two majority parties. And those parties have changed over time because we don't have the same majority parties that we started with in the Republic. So I would expand back on your quotes from President Washington. It'd be a very interesting study.
I have researched that a bit, but thank you, Senator. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. Introduce yourself. Give us your testimony.
Thank you. My name is Jacob Spivak. I'm a software engineer with experience on U.S. government federal IT consulting projects. I came here with some prepared notes, but seeing the testimonies already, I've decided to go off script, and hopefully this can be a little more conversational. I appreciate the back and forth we've already seen talking about the third parties. And I do agree that the third parties, they typically bring in new ideas that get incorporated into the main parties. And I also observe that the parties do change over time, and we seem to be undergoing some of those changes right now. Some people approach this question with the goal of how can we get away from the two-party system, but I don't think that's necessarily the goalpost. I think the goalpost might just be how can the parties better represent their constituents. So bringing my perspective as a software engineer into this, on these government projects that I worked on, we used open source software. Open source software is freedom. If you're not using open source, you are under the control of a closed system that produced that software. So what would it look like if we had an open source election? Software is already very important in many voting systems. It's not fair to simply discount a system because it's implemented in software. Voting machines right now, many of them are black box systems with no transparency. What would it look like if we had a fully transparent voting system where we had transparency into the system itself, but also full transparency into the voters' preferences? I think one of the issues that we're seeing now is that many of the politicians who are lobbying against ranked choice voting realize that they are already not the first choice of their constituents. How many times have people been told to hold their nose and vote for a politician, or to vote, or where their vote is essentially a vote against the opposition, but not voting for what they're truly in favor of? So I see ranked choice voting as simply one option on the table to improve our elections. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Welcome, introduce yourself, give us your testimony.
My name is Ken Moore. I am a State Republican Executive Committee man for Senate District 11, Senator May's district. There's not a whole lot I can add to what's already been said. I think the way the bill was initially laid out is very clear and puts forth most of the issues with it. It will be confusing, and I think especially for those who are older, who are looking at the instructions and trying to figure out what to do with them. We have a system that has served us well for 200 years. I don't see a need to change it. It introduces fuzzy math into the equations, which can give us candidates that no one really wants. And so I would urge you to vote for this bill. I think it's a good one.
And thank you for your testimony. Welcome, introduce yourself and give us your testimony.
Thank you very much. I'm Joanne Richards, and I'm testifying on behalf of myself and ranked choice voting for Texas. I've listened to lots of the testimony. Obviously, I am against this particular bill, and I'm against it because it bans all ranked choice voting. And ranked choice voting for Texas is interested in certain types of elections where we think that ranked choice voting would be of benefit. And the three types are for overseas and military voters who are basically disenfranchised during the runoff election period because they can't get their ballots back in time. These people are people who are serving the country, and we should be letting them let their voice be heard. The second is for special elections, and I have written testimony that I left with you that shows what happened in the 6th Congressional District in Dallas with their special election, and the cost of that special election was really quite large per voter. And so I will refer to that particular document. It looks like this, so that you can see it for yourself. And the third is for nonpartisan municipal elections. In nonpartisan municipal elections, I'd like to share my own experience. I live in Austin. I voted in our city council race and mayor race this past election cycle. I preferred multiple candidates, and I would have been perfectly happy with not just one of the candidates on the ballot, but several folks on the ballot. And I was forced yet to make a decision on only one. I would have preferred to rank my preferences in hopes that 1, 2, or 3 of the people that I voted for would have been elected. Because of the number of candidates, a runoff was forced, and it was a costly and negative campaign that I would like to eliminate. If I might, one more experience is that I am a returned Peace Corps volunteer. And in 1966, I was not able to vote because I couldn't get a ballot.
Thank you for your testimony. Senators, any questions for any of our witnesses? Very well. Thank you for being here. Thank you each. The chair now calls Eric Bronner, Trudy Meyer, Liz Case Pickens. Eric Bonner, Trudy Meyer, Liz Case Pickens. And those are all of the witnesses that we have registered on, for, or against Senate Bill 921. Please have a seat. So if anyone else wishes to testify, please make your way outside the chamber and electronically register at the kiosk. It's very simple. There's someone who can help you. So we're looking for Liz Case Pickens, Trudy Meyer, Eric Bronner. Welcome. Introduce yourself. Give us your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Eric Bronner, and I'm here to register my strong opposition to Senate Bill 921 as both individually and as the founder of Veterans for Political Innovation. I'll be speaking from the heart because I just found out about this bill yesterday. I'm in town for the first time for South by Southwest from Missouri. When I left my home state of Wisconsin in 1993 to go to the Naval Academy, God blessed me with 2 roommates from Texas men of deep character and deep faith, and one of whom I reached out to this morning and asked if I could share a bit of his story. His name's Clint Bruce from Dallas, Texas, Garland. He was an All-American linebacker for Navy, played in the NFL for a minute, and then served as a Navy SEAL. Clint is one of the close to 50% of veterans who are independent. I'm one of them as well. Never joined either major political party, never affiliated with either. And I said, Clint, would you register your opposition to Senate Bill 921? He said, 10,000% yes. Anything that diminishes competition is apart from the founding ethos. There's no reason to preemptively ban ranked choice voting based on some misinformation. It's a tool that gives voters more power through more choice. Our founders chose plurality voting because that was the only thing available to them. But countries such as Ireland and Australia have used ranked choice voting for over 100 years. In Ireland, they still count the votes by hand without any issues. Everywhere where ranked choice has been implemented in our country, 23 cities and counties in Utah use it. The Republican Party in Virginia used ranked choice voting successfully, and 6 southern states use it for military and overseas voting. Voters like it. We don't want to disenfranchise our active duty military. The average dropout rate of participation in runoff elections is 40%. Instant runoff voting would fix that problem and would have saved Georgia taxpayers $75 million.
Thanks for your testimony. Members, any questions? Senator Birdwell. Did I say Birdwell again? You sat in for Senator Birdwell last week, and there's happens all the time, I'm sure. Senator Betancourt, you're recognized.
No, thank you. Thank you for your visit. Hope you enjoyed the South by Southwest.
Thank you.
And just a couple comments. Texas has basically an open primary, so we don't have to register by party here.
Right.
And I just want to make sure if you get a chance to testify, you knew that we had made that major leap some time ago. So thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thanks.
Okay. Members, I'm going to call our resource witness from the Secretary of State's office to answer a couple of questions. There's Ms. Atkins. Christina, please have a seat, introduce yourself, and we got a couple of questions for you.
Good morning. My name is Christina Adkins. I'm with the Secretary of State's office, and I'm here to testify on the bill.
Thank you for being here. So help us understand the process now for military overseas ballots. My recollection is that in recent years, the time frame when there's a reason for a runoff, when there's cause for a runoff, the time frame between the general election or the primary and the runoff has been extended to allow for overseas military ballots. Will you walk us through that, please?
Absolutely, that's correct. So we have, for example, when we're talking about our primary elections, we have our primary occurring in March. A number of years back, we moved the primary runoff date in order to accommodate the requirements under the Federal MOVE Act to give our military and overseas voters that 45-day window for which mail ballots are sent out to voters. There are also a number of military voters that can opt to receive their balloting materials by email, and so email is a way to deliver their balloting materials to them so they can print them off, mark them, and then put them in the mail.
Senator Betancourt. Thank you. Senator Betancourt.
We did do a major expansion of a portal, I believe, that folks can use to track ballots during the previous year. I don't think our previous guest who had just dropped in for South by Southwest would know that. Would you describe how that portal is working? Because one of the reasons why I offered that amendment was because not only for disabled voters, but for also military voters as well.
Yes, Senator. As a result of legislative efforts in 2021, we now have a requirement for the state to implement a ballot by mail tracker so that anybody that's voting by mail can log into the system, check the status of their application, including our military and overseas voters, and they can check the status of their mail ballot throughout the process itself. What you referenced, Senator, was the fact that now in this online ballot by mail tracker, there is the ability if a voter forgets to include their identification numbers on there, they can log into the tracker to make that correction electronically.
Right. So with that, that is obviously a big improvement because that information can be accessed directly by the military voter, disabled voter, any voter really, and wherever they are in the world, because it's all online. So I'm glad to hear that we made such good progress from legislation. It's great to be. I think there was an amendment on your bill, Chairman.
I believe so. Yes, sir. Senate Bill 1.
Right.
Thank you, Senator Birdwell. And I meant Senator Birdwell this time. Go ahead.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's never Senator Bedcore. It's always Senator Birdwell, sorry.
Okay. Just a couple of quick questions. While I retired back in 2004, so it's been 19 years since I took the uniform off, I have voted from overseas. So some of the things you just mentioned technologically were not in place when I was on active duty. The purpose of the 6 weeks is for 2 weeks of the between the regular election and a runoff. Is first 2 weeks, correct me if I'm wrong, first 2 weeks is the certification of the runoff election, so that the ballot for runoff, the next 2 weeks can get to the service member. The following 2 weeks of that 45 days is for the service member to return it. So the real challenge for the service member is not that the state will, because I've dealt with this, not in as an advanced a way as, logging in and checking where my vote is. That was not in place at the time that I was voting overseas, but the purpose of that is that 6 weeks is to give the soldier the ability, or sailor, airman, Marine, the ability to respond. What the state is not in control of, and what the soldier or sailor is not in control of, is in that intervening 6 week period. I've gotten that call where, the colonel says he needs to see you, and 48 hours later, I'm on a plane to El Salvador. Or, back in 1991, we're preparing to deploy to the first Gulf War. The sailor's not in charge of that. The Navy veteran, we just had a go Army beat Navy, but the Navy veteran that came and testified. When those guys in the boomers or the fast attacks go underneath the water, they're not coming back up. I don't know if there's a mechanism to allow them to, runoff is going to occur, but their ship deployment, once they go under the waves, I don't know if there's a mechanism. Is there such a mechanism have I explained the system fairly accurately? And at that point, it's really up to the discretion of the deployment structure of the services that really determines the soldier's availability. It's not the election structure, but it's the military services are determining where the service member has to be, and the ballot catching up to them may be the challenge.
I think that's a fair statement. I think that's a great description because, we have the tools in state law and in federal law to get our military voters their balloting materials, electronically to get it to them a little bit more quickly. But then at that point, it's the service member's obligation and whatever their situation is with their deployment to be able to get that ballot, mark it, print it, and put it back in the mail. As you indicated, when we have individuals that are stationed overseas or in hostile fire pay zones, there is a level of complication that could be there in getting that ballot back. That's going to vary considerably depending on the service member's circumstances.
Right. So if you is the proposition to do ranked choice voting so that the military member can choose, or the independent can choose, regardless of party, at one time, rather than, so to make sure that the ballot doesn't have to chase the service member? Because I always, registered as a Republican, so I would receive the Republican primary ballot, and then I would receive the general election ballot. If there was a runoff, I would receive it, but mail was probably a little slower than it is at this juncture, thus the MOVE Act. So what we've got to decide through is that process for soldiers making a decision whether, because I assume we require service members to declare party, and if they declare independent, do they only receive a general election ballot? Is that what happens if they declare independent?
That's correct. If they don't have a particular party affiliation where they indicate what primary they want, then they won't get a primary ballot at all. The voter has to affirmatively choose the primary. And one thing that you mentioned that I just want to add is with respect to our military voters, there's actually also a provision in federal law that allows them to submit what we call a federal write-in absentee ballot. And so if somebody was in the circumstances that you described where they were being deployed or sent off to another location unexpectedly and they didn't have time to receive that runoff ballot, they actually can do what we call this specific write-in ballot, and they can send that in on their own as long as they have already turned in the proper application form, the federal postcard application ahead of time. So for that runoff situation, there is that option available to our military voters when they have a change in circumstances, and they may not be able to wait for the runoff ballot.
Okay. All right. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Atkins. Any other questions for the resource witness? Thank you for being here. Is there anyone else present wishing to testify on, for, or against Senate Bill 921? Seeing none, testimony is closed. The bill is left pending at this time.